In this lesson, we introduced the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs for short. Many of you may know much about these already, and for the rest of us, this is a great place to start if you want to learn about where we need to focus our efforts for a more sustainable future, and the pathways on how to get there, from both environmental and social perspectives. And since the United Nations represents all of us, it's important to know what they're working on. Let's get started. More than 20 years ago, the United Nations convened what they called the Millennial Summit to commemorate the start of a new millennium, assess the state of the world, and how the UN could help to improve the lives of people across the globe. The meeting culminated in the creation of 8 Millennium Development Goals, or MDGs, focused on human capital, infrastructure, and human rights. The 8 goals included eradicating extreme poverty and hunger, achieving universal primary education, promoting gender equality and empowering women, reducing child mortality, improving maternal health, combating HIV/AIDS, malaria, and other diseases, ensuring environmental sustainability, and developing a global partnership for development. The UN set 2015 as the date for the 8 MDGs to be achieved, an ambitious date for sure when considering the magnitude of the challenges in each of the 8 MDGs. These were goals all countries could get behind, and as a result, all member countries signed on, giving the MDGs global support and, importantly, financing. By 2015, when the MDG program ended, it was clear that the goals weren't met to the extent the UN was hoping. Yet with much of the world highly engaged and at least trying, there was considerable progress toward many of them. For instance, if we consider the goals for the number of people living in extreme poverty, the number of people hungry and malnourished, and the number of kids aged 5 to 11 that were not in school, along with the death rates for children under the age of 5, all of these were reduced by at least 50%. And while not 100%, we can take some pride in knowing that many of the people around the world are living a much better life as a result of the Millennium Development Goals. In 2012, a few years before the end of the MDG effort, the UN convened another conference, this one on sustainable development, in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. This was commonly called the Rio +20 Conference, referring to the Rio Earth Summit held 20 years earlier in 1992. In preparation for a post-2015 plan, the conference produced a document titled The Future We Want, which was a common vision of sustainable development around the globe. The vision set forth in The Future We Want became the foundation for another set of goals and objectives, known as the Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs for short. The SDGs were adopted at the 2015 UN Sustainable Development Summit, and all member nations signed on once again, giving the SDGs global support. Now, the SDGs were also non-binding, which means they were just goals for each country to meet, with no real penalties if countries didn't get there. But even with that, most nations wanted to do the right thing. So let's take a look at the SDGs and see what they're all about. If you've ever seen the United Nations graphic showing the SDGs, this is what it looks like. There are 17 goals, with each one having a set of measurable targets, totaling up to 169 measurable targets in all. The UN also set out to achieve the goals by 2030, so like the MDGs, 15 years to meet some very ambitious objectives. You may have also heard of the 2030 Agenda, which refers to these 17 goals. The Sustainable Development Goals are a call to action to end poverty, protect the planet, and improve the lives and opportunities of everyone, everywhere. For example, SDG number 1 is no poverty, followed by number 2 of no hunger. So you can see the 17 SDGs incorporate some of the same goals we saw in the Millennium Development Goals, Yet now we get more specific. Note, for instance, affordable and clean energy, SDG number 7. Not just access to energy as before, but now access to clean energy. SDGs 14 and 15 address life below water and life on land, respectively, both of which address biodiversity in our oceans and lakes, as well as everywhere on land. You can find out more about the SDGs at the website below the graphic. Go ahead and check it out to learn more. Let's dive into one of the SDGs and see what's going on here, specifically SDG number 6, Clean Water and Sanitation. The overarching objective of SDG 6 is ensure availability and sustainable management of water and sanitation for all. The goal then lists 6 targets, with metrics established for each target. Now, I know the font is pretty small, but I wanted to get them all in there. For example, 6.1 says, by 2030, achieve universal and equitable access to safe and affordable drinking water for all. Target 6.2 says, by 2030, achieve access to adequate and equitable sanitation and hygiene for all. Each of these has their own metrics. The metric for 6.1 is the proportion of population using safely managed drinking water services. For 6.2, the proportion of the population using safely managed sanitation services, including a hand washing facility with soap and water. Take a look at the other 4 targets, and you'll see how comprehensive the SDGs can really get. If you want more information on SDG number 6, just click on the link under the icon and explore it for yourself. Let's look at one more SDG. Sustainable Development Goal number 12 is quite interesting, as it addresses responsible consumption and production, something we talked about in our last lesson. The full goal is to ensure sustainable consumption and production patterns. So what does that really mean? In this case, we have 8 targets, although in even smaller font, so sorry about that. 12.3 states, have the per capita global food waste at the retail and consumer levels. That's getting pretty specific. And it's measured with something called the Global Food Waste Index, a metric many countries are already using to track their own food waste. 12.4 is also quite interesting. By 2020, achieve the environmentally sound management of chemicals and all waste through their life cycle, in accordance with international frameworks. The metric here is how many countries sign up for this one, and the total amount of hazardous waste released into the air, land, and water. You can learn a lot more about SDG number 12 by clicking on the link below its icon. In fact, you can explore any of the SDGs using the link, navigate around a bit, and see what intrigues you. Well, now that we're more than 8 years into this, how are we doing? The UN publishes an annual Sustainable Development Goals report for each year. The one shown here is for 2022. The plots, assessing progress for SDG number 6, Clean Water and Sanitation, are taken right from the 22 report. What is plotted is the percent of the goal achieved on the y-axis, and the year on the x-axis, going from 2015 to 2030, showing the progress thus far, as well as what it will take to achieve the targets of 100% by 2030. Take a look at the chart on the left, representing progress on access to clean drinking water. From the blue line, we see the proportion of the global population using safely managed drinking water services increased from 70% in 2015 to 74% in 2020. Still, 2 billion people were without such services, and at the current rate, the world will only reach 81% by 2030, missing the target of 100%, leaving 1.6 billion people without safely managed drinking water supplies. The chart on the right shows progress on the goal for basic sanitation, meaning access to toilets and other sanitation services. From 2015 to 2020, the world population using safely managed sanitation services increased from 47% to 54%. If historical rates of progress continue, the world will only reach 67% by 2030, far below the target of 100%, leaving 2.8 billion people without access. Today, nearly 500 million people have no access to toilets and have to resort to open defecation. The important thing to note here is that considerable progress has been made during the time since the Millennium Development Goals were in place, progress that continued to 2020 when these data were reported. But if you project forward based on progress so far, you'll quickly see that we're not on a path to achieve 100% by 2030. That's why the dotted lines to the right of 2020 are so much steeper. That's what we need to do to hit the SDG target. While we're only showing some of the results for SDG number 6, clean water and sanitation, most of the 17 SDGs are like this. Great progress, but not nearly fast enough to get us to 100% by 2030. If you want to read more about our progress to date, you can download the 2022 report at the link given, or you can find it in course resources. Knowing we're not on a path to hit our 2030 goals, the United Nations released a more urgent call to action in 2020, titled A Decade of Action, meant to accelerate our efforts in order to achieve our 100% targets. According to the plan, the Decade of Action calls for accelerating sustainable solutions to all the world's biggest challenges, ranging from poverty and gender inequality to climate change. The plan calls for a three-pronged approach: global action to secure greater leadership, more resources, and smarter solutions for the Sustainable Development Goals; local action, embedding the needed transitions in the policies, budgets, institutions, and regulatory frameworks of government, cities, and local authorities; and people action, including by youth, civil society, the media, the private sector, unions, academia, and other stakeholders, to generate an unstoppable movement pushing for the required transformations. So the idea here is to engage a broad range of stakeholders, from leaders in national and local governments to each of us. Let's summarize some of the major efforts undertaken by the United Nations. The Millennium Development Goals, or MDGs, were established in 2000 to create the roadmap for a better life for everyone on the planet. Considerable progress was made, but we didn't quite get there on most of the targets when the program ended in 2015. The United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs, were implemented in 2015 as the follow-on to the MDGs, with 2030 set as the year for achieving those goals. 17 SDGs were defined, covering a wide range of issues: human well-being, creating a global sustainable infrastructure, and addressing climate change. Each SDG had several quantitative targets to gauge success. And while progress has been slower than desired, progress is in fact happening. The Decade of Action engages all stakeholders, from large governments to each of us, to get more involved. What's both fun and rewarding is that the more we know about the Sustainable Development Goals, the more we understand how we can have a positive impact with even small changes in our daily lives. In fact, go ahead and check out the UN website for the SDGs and see if there's one that piques your interest. That's a great way to get personally involved.